Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to continue our look at the New Deal in the United States with some of the larger impacts that started taking place after the first programs were put into place. Last time we talked about some of the New Deal programs like Work Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps, Agricultural Adjustment Act, and FARA. And these all were designed to help get the economy moving again, create jobs, create infrastructure, and we're going to continue our look at these programs with one that went in a radically different direction, and that is the Works Progress Administration. Now, if you are a struggling artist or actor or painter or thespian, it is really difficult to make your way in the world. During a depression, it's much more difficult. People are less likely to go to the theater, to spend money on art, to spend money on culture when they don't exactly have money to put food on the table to begin with. So, these individuals usually have to give up their craft, give up their skill, do something else. And that's damaging not just to the person, but to the larger cultural legacy that a nation can have. Realizing this, Harry Hopkins would be put in charge of this program that would go on to employ millions of people to continue doing that thing that they can do, to paint murals on walls, to direct and star in plays, to make music, to beautify local areas and give a cultural legacy that would continue to grow. The arts are such an important thing to a society that when they disappear, there's a giant vacuum left over. Roosevelt had planned for 100 days of programs and transformations, and at the end of that 100 days, the public was wildly behind the New Deal. Originally, there was a lot of skepticism whether this would work or not, but people were working. People had jobs, money is coming in. There had been considerable recovery. There's still millions of people unemployed, but there were aspects of the New Deal that could apply to everybody. During this time of the Great Depression and the early parts of the New Deal, we see that the most popular new form of literature that's being made is in this Soviet style, what's referred to proletarian novels and novellas. And the reason that these were so popular in the 30s and 40s, the 30s would be because the Soviet Union was not affected by the Great Depression. The Great Depression, as you know, it didn't just affect the United States, it affected the whole wide world and everybody in it, except for the Soviets. They were actually able to see significant gross domestic product growth during this time. And yes, the Stalinist purges were happening and the starvations were happening at the same time, but those were not known yet. The only thing that the Soviets are showing is their giant, very successful transformations. So that's why these books were so very, very popular during this time. In the United States, probably the greatest author of this time period would be Steinbeck, and he creates these works for the downtrodden people, the people who lived through the worst of the Great Depression and who didn't see the New Deal as the massive, wonderful transformation. Grapes of Wrath tells a story of an Oklahoma family who tries to go to California seeking the good life. It's going to be so much better there. They had lost it all in Oklahoma, and when they get to California, they find it's not the magical transformation that they thought it was going to be. And it really does end on this major downer because there is no magical transformation. There is no happy ending. It just kind of is over. And for a lot of people, it's important to point out that happened for a lot of people. When the New Deal was first going, and even before, when the Depression years were really, really bad, there were a series of extremists who all wanted to say they had the next big plan to fix the country. And the first of these guys was this man. He was a senator from Louisiana. His name was Huey Long, as you can obviously see. And when we think back, I want you to think back to the Gilded Age, and we talked there about city bosses, guys like William Boss Tweed, who used graft manipulation to become king of New York City. Long did the same kind of thing, only across an entire state, and it's Louisiana. He doesn't question segregation. He doesn't question the long-standing white supremacy that had come into existence, but he really doesn't like African Americans. He is most remembered for the fact that he believed all people should have a chance to get a decent living. And yeah, even though he is, hugely racist, he does include all citizens in that. And he's most remembered for the Share Our Wealth movement. And the idea of this is it's a super socialist program that says, okay, we are going to tax the wealthiest people in the nation, divide up their wealth, and distribute it to everyone else in the country. So if you made more than, at the time it was $1 million, then you couldn't earn more than $1 million. Every penny beyond $1 million is given to the rest of the nation. And this was super popular. I mean, he got 4.5 million people joining it, and he even knocked around the idea of running for president in 1936. And if he had, he really might have won, but he was assassinated, and his political aspirations kind of died with him. The radio was a place for religious fundamentalism to grow as well during this time. And Charles Coughlin was one of these guys who had a ability to just reach more people through his radio program. He used his faith to justify his economic guidelines. He believed that the wealth of the nation, the dollar, was not stable enough, and that it should be inflated, ultimately made less stable, print out more money, give more money to more people so that you have more money. Yes, it will lead to inflation, but we'll have money for now. It is definitely a short-term fix with a very bad long-term problem. He believed that religion should spread, and like I said earlier, he justified religion for a lot of what he wanted to do. He believed all banks were evil, that the New Deal plans were erroneous and wrong, that the Agricultural Adjustment Act was just bonkers, and he believed that Franklin Roosevelt's administration gave too much sympathy to communist people and Jewish people. He tried to also run for president, but he doesn't get very far. He didn't even get as far as Long did. Long was dead by that point. And our last big extremist guy was Francis Townsend. And Townsend believed that the way to fix the nation's economy was to create this old age pension program that every person over the age of 60 could be eligible to join this, and that the pension would give each person in the country 60 or older $200, and they get that at the first of every month. There's only two conditions. The first one is you couldn't hold a job, and the second is you have to spend all that money in 30 days. This was supposed to get older people out of the job force so that younger people could easier get a job. Spending that kind of money, which $200 a month now, you're in poverty if you're living in just 200 bucks a month. But, during the 30s, during the Great Depression, you are definitely able to live really comfortably on that. The problem is that, yeah, it'll create money circulation. I mean, if you go and spend money on a restaurant on dinner, then the waiter can afford to go get himself some new shoes. He buys shoes from the cobbler. The cobbler can then afford to put food on his table also. The problem is just giving the money carte blanche would create a debt of $24 billion a year. By the time the second New Deal gets really knocked around, there's a lot of programs that had been created, a lot of infrastructure is now in place, and a lot of people are moving forward, but the economy is still not doing super great. In fact, we see that there's some attempts by people to remove elements of the New Deal. The National Industrial Recovery Administration was considered and ultimately ruled an unconstitutional monopoly at this time. And the second New Deal comes into existence. The big difference between the first New Deal and the second New Deal is the first New Deal kind of creates the jobs, creates the ability to grow the economy, and the second New Deal kind of takes care of the workers, the laborers, the business side itself. So we're seeing two different parts of this. We see that during the second New Deal, we get the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, which is going to allow unions to do more, to legally strike more, to request for more, to demand for more. The National Labor Relations Board also creates the elections within large industrial plants that will eventually go on to give big business the ability to work with their labor in union entities. This is going to hopefully create an entity that can do one for the other. And then finally, Dr. Townsend's plan is really turned into an actual thing. It's no longer just, hey, here's money, go spend it. It's, hey, you pay into this fund your whole life, and when you're ready to retire, you can then start withdrawing that money. Finally, we see that the Tennessee Valley Authority had grown to the Rural Electrification Administration, which continued to do what TVA did, to get electricity to the more rural parts of the nation. The big difference is location. TVA worked just in the Tennessee Valley area, and the Rural Electrification Administration worked anywhere that was considered rural, which is a much larger area. The Wealth Tax Act will raise taxes on your wealthy, which includes gifts and estate taxes. So if I am dying and I gift or will somebody a large amount of money, there's a chance that that money may be taxed. Same thing goes with an estate. One of the big final questions that we've got is, when does this spending stop? And John Maynard Keynes, who was a legendary economist, brought this up like a couple of times and had been a published economist by this point for a long time, saying the programs that we're using to get people jobs, the programs that are used to get us out of the depression, eventually that spending is going to have to stop. And big spending, when it stops, it has to stop a very specific way. If the government is spending a lot on these programs and then the money stops, if the programs aren't self-sufficient, they're going to go under and take anything around them with them. Now, Roosevelt really never really accepted this and kind of continued doing this. There's some people who theorize that this is one of the reasons why the Depression lasted as long as it did. But that is a story for another day. Today we talked about the different types of New Deal programs. We talked about extremism and how some of these programs would grow into other things, and how culture kind of was shaped during the New Deal. Hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.